Normally, as we move into the end of the year, we would typically see an increase in spending, an increase in economic activity. This year, however, is very, very different. Not normal at all. The first thing I want to look at is what's spending, what's happening, what's going on. I'll give you all those details. The second is stoking inflation. We can see what governments are doing today and the actions that it has directly on you that affects you. I will show you what you need to know. And the third thing is energy costs. I know you've been feeling it. You've been telling me exactly what's been happening in your circumstances. I've got some updates. I've got a lot of information to cover. Let's begin. Okay, so let's begin right here. Inflation is set to spoil holidays for struggling U.S. families. Higher prices add strain on the top of the loss of federal assistance. Wealthiest are seen spending even more, deepening inequality. So there are some people that are spending more and others not able to spend at all. And I have noticed this time and time again. We see wealth inequality getting worse as time goes on. The more actions that these governments and central banks take, the worse things become. Retailers are forecasting a record holiday spending season, but for 1 in 10 Americans, price rising at the fastest pace in 30 years will dampen Christmas spirit. Inflation is especially taking a toll on lower income families who spend roughly a third of their earnings on essentials like food and energy. It's eating into the recent wage increases, by the way, that only some are feeling. And the timing couldn't be worse after the relief expired for about 7.5 million people. I covered that here on the channel, showing you how spending was directly correlated. You see the spike in savings and spending as soon as those stimulus went out to the people and came back down as soon as it wore off rather quickly. Anything that in the very short run puts a lot of pressure on families' budgets across the board will cause more stress and damage to the low-income households because they just have less scope to absorb it. Weird word to use in that case here. But anyway, you could just see what's going on. But I know you already know the food and energy prices are off the charts. Wall Street bankers and traders are in line for the biggest bonus increases since 2009. So while the average person not doing so well, but have no fear because Wall Street's doing great. You could see what's happening with the adjusted retail and food services sales, monthly and yearly. They are both rising right now, year over year, month over month, doing well overall. But we need to look at that and break it down. What's happening though? Is it so linear? I would argue that's not the case. Fed's Bullard urges more hawkish policy to offset inflation rise. Can you believe it? I mean, we've got a Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis president, James Bullard. Bullard, who's kind of turned the corner a little bit in what he has talked about. I think even Bullard is starting to say, maybe this stuff isn't such a wise idea. FOMC has retained optionality on speeding up the taper process, essentially saying that we're going to do it in this way, at least for these 2 months, November, December, but we're going to kind of see what happens. You have to, you can't ignore, you can't ignore the fact that inflation is rising. Even the Federal Reserve president is saying this. I think it behooves the committee to go in a more hawkish direction in the next couple of meetings, so we are managing the risk of inflation appropriately. I mean, have you ever heard of somebody in the Fed saying this at all? We could move faster. We kept optionality on this, that we could speed up the taper if it's appropriate. At this time, of course, not the case. Another consideration I would put on the table and have put on the table is that we can allow a runoff of the balance sheet at the end of the taper instead of waiting on the decision for a while. I think that we could be a way to have somewhat more hawkish policy than otherwise, essentially saying instead of keeping their balance sheet at whatever it's going to be, let's say $9.5 trillion, they could start to let all that garbage that they've bought expire and mature. We will see what happens. Okay, we really don't know. And then we switch over to Canada. Trudeau risks stoking inflation with stimulus plans, according to Scotiabank. Canadian consumer prices are rising amid labor shortages. Quote, they could make the job more difficult, according to the Bank of Canada. Ever since the elections, we've seen the vulnerabilities in the recovery in terms of higher inflation and severe labor shortages. So different economic issues are emerging and appearing bigger than during the election time, so just a little while ago. It doesn't matter. Canada, you look at the US, you look at Australia, New Zealand, the UK, it's all basically the same situation. There's always going to be variances, but it's the same situation, particularly for those in the bottom 50% and really in the bottom 80%. In response, the central bank ended its bond buying program and accelerated its timeline for rate increases. Our forward guidance has been clear that we will not raise interest rates until the economic slack is absorbed. That's right, don't worry. Housing prices getting out of control, we're not going to stop that. Let's keep it going. This is the way it is. New spending could potentially exacerbate the pressures we are seeing right now on the inflation side, so that could make the job more difficult for the Bank of Canada if they go with a whole lot more. That's what's going to happen. They're going to have to react too late, and you know what's going to happen. This is an article that I talked about previously, something that I've mentioned actually multiple times, but I wanted to dig into it just once again. The Wall Street Journal had this, basically referring to the fact that in different stores, they are facing up all of the shelves because they don't have enough inventory. They're putting, whatever they do have, if they have, tons of whatever this is, and they have none of that, well, they're going to bring that all up to the front, make it look all good. Or they're putting cardboard cutouts where they're supposed to be products. And they say, this is not a problem. It's fine. It's totally good. You read this Wall Street Journal article. They say this is something that they've always done. I had talked about this and people were saying, there was a few comments anyway, that were saying, this is not true. Where I go, it's not true, therefore it's not true. It depends where you are. Some stores, they're fully stocked, it seems. Others, not the case. But it's starting to become more prevalent. Some have stacked whole aisles with items that ordinarily have a small space on one shelf. Others have been filled the gaps with cardboard dummies, including empty prepackaged sandwich boxes, a tactic that isn't new, but one that shoppers are likely noticing is becoming employed more frequently. And they go on. I just think that needs to be said, and we need to understand how important that is. It shows you what's happening. So we're given the image that everything's okay, but of course it isn't. Walmart says it's ready for the holidays, but hasn't yet seen a huge wave of early shoppers. Walmart being a good indicator, I believe, Walmart and Costco. And this is important, but we have to look at it a little deeper and understand that it's not always going to be the case when you've got, let's say, Black Friday, where a lot of shoppers wait for that particular event to start their shopping. This year, the expectation was people are going to start early because they're worried about the shortages and so on. But at least Walmart, in this case, hasn't seen it yet. We must understand that right now, it's the governments that are creating and exacerbating this crisis. They need to change their policies or it's only going to get worse. Inflation cannot be stopped. It only rises, especially when they ignore it. My message to you is to assess your personal circumstances, your personal situation, invest and prepare for higher inflation. If you believe that higher inflation is going to continue, then prepare accordingly. Don't just stand there. Don't be a sitting duck. Take action today. I thought this was interesting here. Subway fare increase off the table thanks to the infrastructure bill. Out of the New York Times. Now, some people might say, well, that's great. But if you look into this, the $1 trillion infrastructure bill, money was handed left, right, and center, as you know. But look, part of the relief package, including $11 billion, New York would receive after resolving a protracted funding fight with the neighboring Connecticut and New Jersey. The money would allow the authorities to stave off decisions that it worried might lower ridership at a time when the subways, buses, and commuter trains are aggressively trying to lure back passengers. This is something that I think needs to be understood. because that money is going to help this for how long? Says it right here, 6 months. Now, I don't know if all that money is necessarily going towards it. I mean, 11 billion. I don't know. I don't know where all that money is headed, okay? But if it's 11 billion to stave off that rate increase, the hike for 6 months, I don't think they're getting a good deal in New York. That's all I'm saying. My friends in Australia, check this out. It was sent to me by one of my subscribers. Australians sleepwalking into disaster as interest rate hike threatens to plunge thousands into financial stress. You out there, do you know anybody that is always living paycheck to paycheck, that their expenses are too high for their current living standards? Let me know in the comments below. Do you know anybody like that? Are you seeing that in front of your very eyes? Take a look. Just take a look at this right here. I've seen this, by the way, I've seen this information so many times before. Canada, US, all over the place, essentially saying the same thing. The research showed that 66% of borrowers would be under pressure if interest rates were to rise, and 57% would not be able to make repayments if their mortgage were to increase by as little as $300 per month. My goodness gracious. All right. If you agree that this is really, really shocking to see just a few $100 increase breaking people, hit that thumbs up. All right. When you do, you stimulate this video to get pushed out to people who aren't even aware of the Money GPS. So I do appreciate that. Germany's energy regulator has suspended the approval process of a major new pipeline bringing Russian gas to Europe, throwing up a new roadblock in the contentious project and driving up regional gas prices. I mean, this is unbelievable. Nord Stream 2 temporarily halting the certification process. And what do you think happened? European prices jumped almost 11% on the news. The Dutch front month contract hitting 90 euros. This does push back expected timelines quite a bit. You can read the details in this article of Reuters as well as this one in the Financial Times, just basically getting to the numbers. UK gas contracts for delivery in December rose 17%. This is just, they just go on, okay? The fact that they can't get this sorted out is not good for the people. I know a lot of people like to argue, well, it's because of this or that, whatever the case may be. I care about you, the individual, and how much you have to pay for your prices. That's why I say for some people, they were able to negotiate a price, a fixed price, and that might be a wise idea. This right here is just showing you a little, basically chart, just showing the weather patterns essentially and saying we may be in for one heck of a December. If we scroll down, this person here basically says the very warm SST in Hudson Bay are highly concentrated to a cold temperature pattern over the northeastern US. Think about it. Low pressure over Hudson Bay will guide the cold southeast into the eastern US. Makes sense to me. So essentially, as there was one comment that right down there, big winter coming. Something I've talked about before. It's the US. I've seen talk about Australia, about Europe, of course, and China, all believing right now that this winter is going to be a cold one. Port of LA containers by dwell time. You could see how this is increasing. All these numbers, I've talked about it so many times. Port of Long Beach. You could see how the containers pass their deadline. It continues on and on. And by the way, the whole, we're going to charge them $100 a day for their container if they leave it there, that didn't go through. Average days waiting from Anchorage to Los Angeles berth continues to increase, and we are at approximately 18 days right now. Switching gears really quickly, European stocks have never been this cheap versus the US market. For anybody wanting to look at this as from an investor point of view, look at what's happening with the US markets. They've gone berserk. They have gone crazy. Okay, you could take a look at this. Just see where everything is. This is all the 4 US markets. overbought on all different types of indicators. But the point is, we are seeing a very different story in Europe as well as Japan. I'm not telling anybody what to invest in, but when you look at it comparatively, you do see a big difference. And that's the chart that goes along with that. This goes all the way back to 2005. Never seen them this cheap relatively. And that could tell you that maybe Europe and Japan are more fair valued and that the US is completely overvalued, or you could see it as Europe being undervalued. However you want to process that information. As always, links will be in the description if you want to check it out. And I'll end with Bill Gross saying investors are lulled into dreamland by central banks. PIMCO founder says stimulus and low interest rates have created a dangerous situation. If you have time, definitely check this one out. He shared a lot of good details, things that I do agree with. And if you have not already, go down there and hit that thumbs up button. It helps to support the channel, and I do appreciate that very much. If you haven't seen this video, you definitely want to check it out, all right? Just click it, and I'll see you there.